Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. On today's show, art and books, art books, and books as art. We'll be cracking the spine on a genre and an industry that brings together the worlds of art and publishing. The inspiration for this show stems from a fascinating new exhibition at London's Warburg Institute, which highlights artists' publishing and art libraries. We'll sit down with the thoughtful co-curators. Then we'll head to Tate Modern to take a different look at the topic. We'll catch up with the head of book sales and buying at that storied institution. So do stay tuned. That's all coming up right here on Monocle on Culture. Arnaud Desjardins is an artist, publisher and bookseller. He runs an imprint called The Everyday Press and a second-hand book dealership called Bunker Basement. Hlib Velikorski is the founder of Biblioteka, an artist library that has a playful take on the meaning of just that thing, a library. Together, the two are co-curators of Art and the Book at the Warburg Institute. The exhibition is an expansive survey of artists' books, with examples from all over the world and of all different types. At its heart, the show is a celebration of how artists' books have endured, remained experimental and often very playful in the years since they really exploded in the 1960s, and despite the rise of digital media. The exhibition also explores libraries and asks, what are they really? What and who are they for? And why is community so important for what appears as a solitary activity, that of reading? The conversation I had with Arnaud and Hlib was wide-ranging. This is a topic they've obviously had a lot of time to spend pondering. So instead of trying to capture all of it, we're going to throw you straight into the melee, at a point in which we're discussing the idea of books as a technology and how they evolve. Here's Hlib on the ideas of the French thinker Michel Butor.
This French philosopher called Michel Butor, back in the 60s, he wrote that the introduction of new mediums never replaces the previous one. It shifts the whole media landscape. So with the introduction of the digital, we have books in a shifted media landscape. So, which brings like a different consideration of why do we print, why do we distribute books in the way we do, and how this format operates.
But I think also in the shifted media landscape, it's not just why, it's how. You know, so it's how you print books. It's actually you print books through the digital media.
Yes.
You know, you design it how? You design it through digital tools. So you produce PDFs before they print it. So this kind of interconnection of media is also kind of really badly understood. And so it's really badly understood that, yes, books have a kind of a 500-year history, but in a way, that 500-year history has also been shifted by what's going on today.
Well, I love that you brought up the kind of tension, perhaps, between the digital world and then the print world. And, I mean, that's an interesting thing. This radio station is part of a magazine. You drew my attention to a book which is well, I'll get you to explain it, but essentially it's the digital synthesis or the AI synthesis of some 600 sacred texts. It seems one of the standout pieces in the exhibition here. Can one of you tell me the story behind it?
So the book is called The Word by artist Lisa Chang Lee. And essentially her project is that they train the ChatGPT model on sacred religious texts from different world principal religions and prompted it to like synthesize it into one book. And essentially the idea is to open up a conversation simultaneously to our relationship to technology and our kind of like the new maybe certain hopes that we put in these technologies. I mean, to me personally, this book is essentially about, we did a book launch for it at Biblioteka, and it actually created a lot of new conversations where how do we see technology, how do we see. But yeah, it's a really powerful example of how new.
So what is the word of God, quote unquote, in the world of AI, right? And you, by the way, you print it, and this is a beautifully bound hardback book. It looks like a bit of an up yours to the digital realm, that you have synthesized this thing and put it and bound it so beautifully.
There is this other book that we have at Biblioteca called Coded Bodies, where like they created this. It's a book with artist text, and the artist, after writing it, they read the book into the microphone and they run it through a software which, depending on the loudness of their voice, changed the font size. So as you read, kind of like the font goes like up and down, replicating. And I think that's a really exciting. I think, Arno, you're totally right. That is a really overlooked part of the books, that actually, like, we produce books digitally and we print books digitally.
Yes, yet at the same time, the way we read and the way we kind of engage with these materially printed paper books still holds a kind of a very different kind of status to listening to the radio, to watching screens, or even kind of interacting with text on screen. I mean, I think that all these different levels are kind of very badly kind of understood as a general landscape, you know. So everyone seemed to be kind of focusing on kind of very discrete aspects. It's a bit like it's a bit like, the blind man trying to describe an elephant, you know.
And quite. We set up our radio microphones opposite an artwork on the wall, which is linked to library practice. We're in the library practice part of your exhibition here. Tell us a little about what we can see here, and who the artist is, who the author is, who's put this particular idea together. Because libraries, what is a library, access to libraries, how stuff is displayed and shown and kept, is very central to a lot of the ideas in this show, isn't it?
Yeah, so this diagram is essentially came out of my research on a 17th century librarian called Gabriel Naudet, who wrote a book called Advice on Establishing a Library. And the book is a letter to his patron, Cardinal Mazarin, where in a number of chapters, Gabriel Naudet lays out how to establish a library. And amongst other things, he talks about how to select books, how to acquire books. In the acquisition bit, he actually says the best way to acquire books is to buy existing libraries. Don't bother buying singular books. If you can get collections, go get entire collections. I mean, Gabriel Naudet is really important also because it's one of the early bits of theory of what we consider modern librarianship, and he is the person who made a really strong argument for libraries to be public. Essentially, he convinced his patron to make his library public and available to anyone around. So it's strongly connected to the beginning of public library movement as we know it today.
Naudet is also kind of seen as one of the originators of Enlightenment. So, the Enlightenment's in France. So it's really 100 years before the Enlightenment. You have this kind of one individual who is like an incredible agent for kind of gathering material and gathering people around books and gathering knowledge, but not just any knowledge. Again, kind of a curated, kind of very carefully selected kind of.
Yeah.
So so there's an idea of democratizing knowledge. Knowledge jealously guarded and collected and then democratized, I suppose.
Yeah. And so the idea behind the diagram, that what's actually really unique about Gabriel Naudet, that he pays a very strong consideration for architecture. That he
and so we're looking at a diagram of it's mostly words, but it is essentially a taxonomy of what you need in a perfect library.
It's a spatial diagram. So in Naudet's writing, he says that the library on the one side needs to have some spacious court with wide and agreeable prospect,
We all need that in our life.
Yeah. And so he goes on, and it's like really interesting that he writes about things that, like, in 17th century, he writes that it needs to have pure air, so you don't have like horses around the library. So it's a pleasant experience to come to a library. And he says that light is important, and the reason why he says you don't put a library on the bottom floor and you don't put a library on the top floor to avoid moisture. So like you keep the library needs to be in the middle floors, and he concludes the whole, like the several chapters with the words that the whole layout so like well presented that it brings most pleasure and least trouble.
I like it. I think he's got some decent ideas that could run and run.
But it's actually, but also like it's important part of the context. It's part of the research that I did at the Architectural Association, where Biblioteca is based at the moment. I looked into how Naudet's ideas essentially influenced actual design of actual libraries. And I make an argument that libraries like Sainte-Geneviève in Paris, they follow this spatial idea.
Yeah. I'll just ask you this last one, and I'll be very intrigued to listen to your answers on the idea of a book as an artifact in a digital world. There are a million conversations we could have about how we utilize the digital to make the physical and the book as a pleasurable, tactile thing to enjoy and to feast our eyes and hands upon. What is the role, from the learnings in this exhibition, what is the role of the book in the digital world and the art book in the digital world?
I think a point which is being very frequently overlooked, book is a very highly technological object. the amount, but it's also the thing about the book. It's a very stable technology. We perfected it to a point where we have inks which can resist UV light. We have examples of books which survived for like hundreds and hundreds of years and can still be flipped through. The technological dimension of type font design, the technological dimension of like many things. So like essentially when we do this digital to book comparison, it's like we do a technology to technology comparison.
I'm asking the wrong question.
No, but in the technology to technology thing is the digital provides the speed of distribution, but it's much more ephemeral, and then it also takes constant energy input for the digital to operate, whereas a book kind of runs on light.
To me, but to me, it's a false dichotomy in a sense, because it's not. Books are not detached from the digital kind of realm. They are part of it. They're just a different kind of manifestation. But we have kind of been used to kind of books and for such a long time that actually we forget that books are themselves kind of contingent objects. But they have a few advantages over other kind of purely digital technology, purely quote-unquote digital technology. So yes, once a book is produced, so it will require a certain amount of energy to print and to produce papers. But once it's produced, it doesn't need electricity anymore. So it has a form of autonomy as an object that carries information, as a form of autonomy that really is a winner over digital artifacts, which always require electricity, always require connection. And I think when the connection is lost, the information is lost. Whereas with a book, you can have a book that slips on a shelf for years, and then if it's picked up by the person who actually can read the language it's written on, it can be reactivated. And that's really the magic of books for me.
Also much harder to censor.
In many ways.
Much harder to censor.
Much harder to censor, much harder to rewrite.
Yeah.
And the idea of like with early internet, we had this hope. It's actually like it's a little known fact that the original research for like indexing algorithm on which the first version of Google was created was actually made on a library grant. Or on a grant which was made to a university to improve their cataloging system and like digitize their cataloging system. So, and my claim is it's an example of how essentially like the digital indexing practice, to me, is a continuation of library practice, in the dimension of library practice which deals with the organization of information and knowledge.
Yeah, except now you can see that the integrity of that indexing is kind of been totally enshittified for commercial purposes. So actually you have a search engine that actually purposefully kind of degrades the value of the quality, rather, of the information that then kind of is downloaded upon a search, just for commercial purposes.
That was Arno Desjardins and Ślib Welichorski. And if we've piqued your interest, the Warburg will host the inaugural Bibliotheca Art Book Fair from the 20th to the 21st of June. So plenty of time to still get thrown out of the library for talking. Now, Simon Armstrong has a fascinating job. He's the head of book sales and buying at Tate Modern and Tate Britain. He's also an editor, and he runs his own online bookstore titled Errant Books. I headed to Tate Modern to meet Simon and find out a little bit about his world, as well as to explore the notions of books about artists, books by artists, and books as art objects. Far more than just artist monographs, the Tate Bookshop is of course full of titles on science, politics, you name it. Art may be a jumping off point, but the destination is always unpredictable. You could be taken anywhere in time and space. Better hold Simon Armstrong's hand then.
The first level of a book is obviously information, knowledge. Hopefully that'll turn into wisdom, something like that. It's information, basically, in circulation and distribution of information to people, which is the first point. But the second thing about books is a feeling of connection, a feeling of sanctuary, a feeling of escape, a feeling of release, something else. There's other things going on, a very personal connection to things and ideas, and also this idea of a shared connection to all the people that might have made this thing. They're very kind of life-affirming.
Indeed, they are, yeah.
So,
and they can mean a lot passed between people. I mean, not that they have to be samizdat, they have to be kind of, forbidden books, but they do mean a lot. I mean, obviously, a lot of people come here and buy books as gifts. Now, that can be a benign gesture. There is a lot of meaning to books and by artists, about artists, and this whole realm that we're talking about that is more meaningful than the 200 pages of the thing itself.
Yeah. But I like the ones that do both. So I like the ones that give the information, but there's something else. So when you look at the sales of the monographs, it's really fascinating because obviously you've got key artists that will just sell, right? You've got Picasso, Monet, etc., which they will just keep selling. But there are equivalent bestsellers from artists who are completely unknown or very unknown, and the reason they sell is because the books are.
So they make wonderful books.
Design,
right?
Appealing objects. The artwork is wonderful. And it's amazing because you've got these, essentially you're crossing over these artists. You put them into space and they're selling. But it's very interesting. Why are people choosing those books? It's not just informational. It's something else.
So it's presentational, it's emotional.
Yeah.
It's all of these things.
Lots of things.
Can you, Nate, give us a couple of titles of surprise hits or artists that might not be... You couldn't put them on as artists, perhaps, here at the Tate.
There's a lot of that.
But they sell a shed load of books, perhaps.
Yes, and that's a really interesting point because there's a lot of that happens where there wouldn't be enough to sustain an exhibition.
Yeah.
But there's more than enough to sell lots of books. I mean, there's like one of my favourite painters, an Algerian painter. She's called Etel Adnan. Her work is just so beautiful, and any time there's been 2 or 3 books, and all of them just sell out just immediately. Yeah.
Some artists have a great sort of way, have a great sort of publishing instinct, I think. An amazing way of choosing layouts of... Some artists are brilliant writers. I mean, David Sall is is a brilliant artist who makes wonderful books. He's a very witty writer as well. So there's something of the journalist, the reporter, the editor, the writer to these artists as well to make these
Which is
books,
good and
right?
bad, which is good and bad because,
Are they stealing your job?
A lot of them take over the publication process,
right?
But it can be extremely great and positive, but also, expensive and challenging in certain ways because they want things done a certain way. They understand it. So there's quite a lot of artists I can think of. A lot of photography, actually. A lot of photographers are very tightly linked with book making. It's very closely linked to photography. So you get a lot of photographers who know a lot about books and the creation of books.
And I just wanted to go back to it. We started talking about some of the impetus and catalysts for people coming into the shop. And you said a lot of people, visit Tate, all the Tate museums, perhaps especially Tate Modern, as a place to hang out and meet and just be. If they look around an exhibition, they look around the permanent collection, maybe they'll only look at 100 works, maybe 50 works in an afternoon. They perhaps visit your shop, Simon, to fill in the knowledge, fill in the gaps that they realise in this visit has left them. Do you find that's a catalyst for people?
That's a primary way of... I think of it as the last room of the exhibition.
Okay.
Is the shop. It's an extension of what you've just seen, and it gives you context and kind of understanding around what you've just seen, particularly Tate Modern, where you may really not understand what you've just seen, but you probably feel more comfortable in a bookshop, actually, more familiar in a bookshop in a certain way. So it's a wonderful platform and opportunity. And also for me, like, if you've got someone who's just walked around an art gallery for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then they come in a bookshop, they're far more predisposed to browsing, exploring, discovery, trying out something new than they would be in, say, a high street situation or any other kind of bookshop situation. So to me, it's like an ideal venue for people who are like a little more open, a little more curious. Okay, this kind of, the gallery almost softens them up to try lots of different things. So then it's our job to say, okay, this, we're going to help you to work out whatever it is, whatever little thing you've picked up on. It might be a technique, it might be a method of painting, it might be a reference, it might be some sort of literary link to something. We've got whatever that is for you here, and you can just expand on your own research. And ultimately, we want people... I mean, the way I see it is I've got this idea about what I call creative health. You've got physical health, you've got mental health, and obviously there's huge things for people all the time. But creative health, to me, is the sort of what you go when you get past that. Because really we want people just to make stuff, to write books, to make films, to make art, and so on. And the shop, obviously, is trying to create this cycle of we're going to feed you these ideas and inspirations, we'll give you practical guides on how to draw, whatever it is, whatever it takes. We want people to come from maybe entering this place and feeling that they don't know anything about art and they're not entitled to say anything about it, to kind of converting them into people who are actually making books that will sell in the shop, this kind of idea.
And are booking their tickets ahead of time the next time to see some show. And I guess there's a sense that an exhibition catalogue, for example, which I presume must be your best-selling books, they're almost like looking at an exhibition with the operating instructions on the same page in a way, whereas the wall texts are a little bit more abstruse often in an exhibition. So again, they're a benign space for a book lover or an art lover or someone that is aspirant to both those states. Can be, I suppose. It's a safer and happier place for the layman, I suppose, right?
That's it. But it's just about... My experience here is like you just got to really meet people kind of where they're at and then kind of help them from there, serve them from there. Because this is just about service. All we're trying to do is share ideas and get everyone to participate. That's the whole thing, really.
And to what extent you've got 3,000 titles in stock at the moment?
We've got 3,500 to 4,000 at any one time. But we've got 10 shops. And each one is everything is handpicked for every shop. So there are repetitions, but there's also big differences. Like if you go to Tate Britain, you've got a completely different selection. You've got 500 years of British art. There's a completely different selection of books there, with some overlaps and things. And then Tate Modern, obviously, the emphasis is very much on the current and the contemporary and international, so it's a different thing. And
to what extent is it a resource and a library, and to what extent is it a kind of live bookshop, if you know what I mean?
It's less of a library comprehensive effort than it would have been, say, 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
So, and now it can't be comprehensive, and there's not really any point in doing that. There isn't not in an active shop. In an active shop,
they have, that means that you've got it. Books have got to earn their keep, kind of thing, right?
Yes, you've got to earn your keep. You've got to filter things. You've got to, hundreds of thousands of books published a year. I mean, it's just not something. And then we're not interested in having 1 and 2 copies of every single book that's published.
No,
It's
indeed.
just a ludicrous, absurd idea.
Yeah.
When Amazon exists and various things like that, a lot of our thought is relational to what's going on the internet, and it causes us to behave in a slightly different way.
And how much of your taste, Simon, I mean, you're an editor, you make books as well. How much of your taste is in this bookshop? How much of you is in it?
Well, I'm quite careful about that because...
100%, you mean?
No, like, I stock lots of things that obviously may not get around to reading or may not be inclined to read particularly, but I see the value in people. And I mean, it's hundreds of children's books, for example. I can read lots of them, but not probably, there's so many things I want to read, that, So it's hard to say as well, because my personal tastes and interests over the years have become completely diluted and mixed in with, like, what do people like, what do people looking for. So when I see a book and I'm like, oh, that's amazing, it might not be because I personally want to read. It's like, that's amazing because it's going to work for people.
It would be good in the shop.
Yeah. So actually, sometimes I can't separate the subjective from the objective.
Yeah.
Because it's just, that feels correct. It's a combination of this kind of instinctive thing, but also repetition, going through hundreds of titles each week and then seeing how they sell or don't sell and then responding. See, it's like pattern recognition.
Yeah.
But then I become interested in things. I get caught up in what other people are interested in, But what I don't do, and what I definitely don't believe in, is any kind of elitist, you need this, I think this is important, you should be reading. That stuff belongs in book selling from, like, prior to the 1950s. That's kind of, the priests walking around kind of being instructed. Absolute nonsense. I mean, it's nonsense. It's got no relevance today at all.
Do you find that on the ground? Do you find that when you walk around the shop and in the buying habits of your customers, that any idea of a canon of because presumably there is a canon of art writing. It's just that it's not your job to be selling that to people.
No, you've got to be quite delicate about that. It's a really interesting thing in there about choice and but also guidance, because obviously we get people coming, like I said, lots of uncertain people. Quite right. They want to find the right thing for their gift, or they want to find the right bit of information. So they do need advice and guidance. Yeah. But it's certainly not at all any kind of dictation, like you must have this, like this is important, that's not. There's those distinctions not relevant. It's more like, well, we know about this sounds like the kind of thing that you're interested in, or we know exactly what you're looking for. Like, we know, that's quite common. Lots of people do the same thing. So it's job is service and guidance and all of that stuff. So in many ways, you've got to keep yourself out of it. But I suppose you can't keep your experience out of it. You've got to, trying to find things.
Well, enthusiasm must play a big part.
And passion and enthusiasm, because I get so excited every day. It's like Christmas. I open the box and there's new things in it. That's amazing.
Well, despite the fact that you said that you can't force people, you can take people a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. It would be wonderful to get a recommendation of a book about an artist, a book by an artist, and a book by an artist for our listeners to take home.
There's lots of artists that I really do love, and I think that are valuable in a broad way for lots of people, and I just wish there were more out there and known. Agnes Martin is probably one of my favourite painters, and actually what she's up to and what she's doing is extraordinary, and I really think if more people were aware of that, it would be a good thing. So definitely Agnes Martin. I think Annie Albers is a fascinating person. A lot of her writing, a lot of her kind of teaching side of what she did, extraordinary again, and it has broad application. They're very interesting people across art, design, like everyday life. They're almost like saints, some of these artists, they really are kind of enlightened souls. They're the ones I like.
And just finally, I'd love to know the answer to this, Simon. It seems, having a short walk around the Turbine Hall bookshop here, that books about art quickly become books about politics and activism and money and all sorts of different concerns. Is art really just the label that you put above the bookshop and allow all sorts of things under that label?
I can give you a great quote if you like. Ursula, it's better if Ursula Le Guin tells you the answer.
Is this one you put in the oven earlier?
Ursula Le Guin says, it's one of my favourite quotes, "Books aren't just commodities. The profit motive is often in conflict with the aims of art. And we live in capitalism, and its power seems inescapable. but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings, and resistance and change often begins in art, and very often the art of words. This is the thing. We're dealing with art within capitalism, and that's just how it is. Right? So I have to make as much money as possible to support the gallery and all that. All the profits go to the gallery. But there's still this sort of reality, this kind of enclosure, this thing you're working within. I speak to artists every day who can't afford a studio, who can't get their work out there. I speak to people who want to publish books and they can't afford to do it. You know, that's the reality of the situation. I think art is a solution that sort of is in some ways above and beyond politics and the day-to-day nonsense of news media and all this kind of stuff. I think there's something particular about art that can really help people. That's what I mean about this creative health idea. If you're kind of making and doing and thinking like an artist, I think that's potentially the most transformative thing rather than the other stuff. So it's unavoidable that we have lots of books about all kinds of subjects. It is related to the same stuff, and it is of direct interest to people who love art, but we're living in a particular environment. So it's all connected to that. Everything's connected anyway.
Yeah.
So there's lots of interweaving and different kind of books in that. And some people love that. Some people have a bit of difficulty with that. But I do think it's an overall picture of a sort of thermometer of where we are today. That's what it's about.
To find the form that accommodates the mess, right?
Yeah.
Good enough for Beckett. It's good enough for us. And that is it for our Books as Art and Art as Books show this week. My thanks to Simon Armstrong there and to Arnaud Desjardins and Hlib Velikorski. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. Thank you to Hunter Wang for editing help with this week's episode. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bounds, thank you for tuning in.